Hey everybody, this is Perch, and here with an old friend. It's been a while. Joe Casey, how are you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I was talking. I'm putting a lot of videos up, so I can just basically die, and this channel can continue for a year.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that's the plan.
As long as we're not deprived.
Yeah. So we try our best, but you have since we last talked, you've had a couple comics going, and I think when we talked, Zod was getting ready to launch.
Yeah, God, yeah, that's right.
Tell me about how was the response to that offhand? You got, I mean, I know a lot of people on this channel were looking forward to it. They were reading it. It's nice to get a take on a character. We really like the work.
I thought the response was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you find out just how obscure these characters are in the marketplace once the comic actually comes out. But I thought it was. I had a lot of fun, and it was great to work with Dan McDade. I think the work showed our enthusiasm for what we were doing.
Yeah.
And, listen, you get eight issues of Zod in this marketplace. It's kind of a win in my book.
I would say that's a win. And you also did the Image book for the revival. How did that how do you like that project?
Oh, Blood Squad 7. Well, that's still going on. There's no end in sight for that one. And that one's been a lot of fun too. It's been interesting to balance the I don't want to say nostalgia, but the affection that people have for that era of comics, and yet there's also been people who see it as just a new superhero comic, and so it's fun to get a couple of readers from both of those audiences, and it's been fun so far, and the work is really good. I think it's, as a package, it's one of the better looking comics I've done in a while, sort of top to bottom, and how it's been rolled out, and with the Strike File issue that's coming out, and we're back to the monthly series, and it's kind of like a big art project in a way. And on that level, it's really succeeded. And, hopefully people are into it on a story level, on a character level, and, on we go.
How did it work with the, because that book, as I recall from you launched it as kind of part of a comic. There were some stories, and then it spun off, or how did that all work out?
Well, it started when we did the Dutch story in the Image anthology, the 30th anniversary anthology.
Right.
And then we spun that off into a miniseries, a Dutch miniseries. And then out of that, we spun the Blood Squad 7 monthly series. So it was sort of a connect the dots kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I like that. It's very organic.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way comics used to get launched. You start small and grow into something, and finally it takes flight, and off you go.
I want to talk more about that, because you hit on exactly where I was going. This is how comics used to launch, where you didn't just, now it's almost inverse. We're going to launch an ongoing, and then surprise, it's only got 2 issues to it. And it's like, but before we get there, you're launching something else today, or as doing this video, if you're listening to this right now, you should be able to go to it, and you must tell us what you're launching right now.
I'm finally getting on the Substack bandwagon in my own inimitable way. I'm launching a newsletter today, which is, I've never really done anything like this. I've never been on social media to any great degree. It's never been something that I've ever thought about, but
lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm launching another project in probably a couple of weeks. It's going to get announced. So I thought, if ever I'm going to do something like this, or I'm going to have direct conduit to anybody who's interested in what it is that I do, then this would be the time. So Here we are, and off we go.
This is perfect. So I do want to encourage everybody who's listening to this, there will be a link on the screen, link in the description. Go subscribe, tell friends. You just heard Joe's not wasting all this time with social media, so you waste your time.
That's right.
Get that link out there. And then I'm not going to push you for it, but I will. Hopefully, we'll get you back in a few weeks after you've made that big announcement. I'm anxious to for your new project. Anxious to talk.
Yeah. Oh, we'll dive in.
Yeah.
But there'll be a lot of of hints and teases to this new project in the first couple of weeks of the newsletter.
Yeah.
So it's worth checking in and seeing what we're up to. And there's going to be a lot. I mean, I didn't want to do something that wasn't what I felt content related or content based.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of, I mean, look, I'll use this thing to announce stuff and announce new projects, because let's face it, the general sort of comic book publishing PR machine is broken, and it kind of falls to us as creators to get the word out on what we're doing more than I think it used to be.
Oh,
so there'll be a lot of that, but if it was just that, I don't think it would be worth doing. So I've really, put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into providing real content. It's almost like these newsletters are like little mini magazines to me, or at least magazine articles. And there'll be, behind the scenes stuff that I'll show, like, again, teasing the new announcement that's coming out. There'll be some archive material, some of it that dates all the way back to 1980.
Nice.
In terms of my comic book endeavors.
I've got a little sneak peek of kind of what it is that people are going to find there, and I love the behind the scenes look. You've had, as we've talked about in the past, you've had a great career in comics. You've worked for every major company, from indies to the big two, and you've introduced a lot of characters that have they're getting kind of reintroduced. I don't know if you saw it, by the way, the Ultimate Guardians of the Galaxy, the Ultimate Nullifier is one of the characters in that thing.
I did see that. See that. And I'll be discussing that in one of my upcoming newsletters, I bet.
That's perfect.
I think it's worth excavating the history of that character at some point.
It drove me crazy a little bit. I saw the announcement. I saw a bunch of people like, wow, that's really cool. They finally turned the Ultimate Nullifier into a person. And I'm like, no. There's a history here. Anyway, I'm very excited about the behind the scenes stuff, because these characters are coming back, and I hear time and time again from a ton of readers and people who collect comics and everything else. They're very desperate to learn about how these characters came to be, what the thinking was behind them, what some of the alternate art or designs for them were, and the publishers don't really ever touch that. I mean, it's very rare they touch that. So this is really cool.
So one of the first things I'm going to do in this newsletter is going to crank up in a couple of weeks from today is really, I guess, excavate some of my past work, starting with, and the connection will be made clear once the announcement of what I'm doing next is out there. But I'm going to go back and sort of explore and examine my run on Uncanny X-Men that was back in 2000, 2002. Right. And just really going to pull out things from my archives, some stuff I didn't even know I had, that deal with, again, the origins of certain characters and designs of certain characters. And I really did a deep dive on this series of newsletters about what was going on in the industry at the time, what my thinking was, how it was to work at Marvel at that point, what I was trying to put across in the couple of years I spent there. And I don't know, hard to believe it's been 22 years.
Yeah.
So it's like ancient history now, but some people might find it interesting. And I found it a little interesting once I really started to think about what was going on back then and what happened, how it all happened. Some things that no one's ever talked about before, little bits and pieces of trivia and minutia that, some people might find interesting. I kind of did, going back. And so that'll be a series of newsletters that are sort of filtered in with the other stuff that we've got coming out. But it's going to be a fun little series.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to see it. Both the project that we're teasing here, and but also kind of this newsletter, which, you've
I'd heard something about that. Yeah, so I thought I'd heard it had sort of a weird, almost spiritual bent.
Yeah,
bringing it back, which, as I will reveal in the newsletter, actually tracks with some of my original intentions. I mean, nobody knew it at the time.
Yeah,
but the fact that character has had a life beyond our creation of her it's baffling. But listen, it's happened to me with America Chavez. It's happened to me with Zodiac. I mean, I build these things to last, and
yes.
it's nice to see that they have lasted, even though sometimes it takes 10, 15 years for something to come back around. But in comics, especially at Marvel and DC, they almost always come back around.
Yeah, they do. And I think comics is really dipping into that time period a lot. The characters that were around when you did your run on Uncanny, the Vengeance run. We're seeing you got the Ultimate Nullifier mentioned before. You have America Chavez. You have Stacy X. You got a lot of these characters, Zodiac, that are. I mean, they're mining that era pretty good. So I guess it's the perfect time to go back and give that behind the scenes stuff.
It's insane that it all comes around, but I guess when you're around long enough, it's just bound to happen. So it's cool. That's why you make those characters. That's why you go through the trouble and the hassle and sometimes the heartbreak of creating characters in a work for hire setting, is that at the very least that they will live on and, find a place in the continuity and the culture and the hearts of the readers and, and in subsequent creators. So on average, it's all very cool.
Yeah, I love that perspective, because we hear tons from people just to kind of bemoan that they work for hire and they create these characters, but it's not theirs. And then there's almost a bitterness about it going on. But I like your perspective. You're creating toys for basically other people to play with. That's pretty awesome.
Well, I get the chance to own enough of my own stuff when I do books at Image. So it's not like I'm wanting in that department. So, and I think my track record's pretty good. I haven't created, too many characters that I don't own, but the ones that I have seem to have had a life beyond me, and so I'm proud enough of that.
Yeah, no, I mean I think it's a big deal, and if you have that balance of creating your own characters and also being able to feed things, I mean, I don't know, it's not the worst thing in the world. This sounds grim to create things that outlast us. There's something cool in that legacy.
Well, that's the whole meaning of life, isn't it? To create things that will live beyond you. That's the whole point. We have children, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, and you've created at this point, it has to be hundreds, if not thousands of moments and characters, haven't you?
Well, that I own or that I don't?
Well, no, just sorry that some you own, some obviously you created for someone else, but
yeah, I mean, I would say I'm happy to say that most of the characters I've created that I own.
Yeah.
But the handful that I don't own, I'm still proud of, and they still seem to have a life. I will say part of the newsletter is also excavating and pulling out old ideas and old pitches that didn't go. And there's a few of them. I mean, just like anybody else in the business, I've taken my shot and missed plenty of times. But now the other part of this format that I like is it's substantial enough that you could pull out that kind of material and present it and say, hey, here's an idea that I had for blank in 2005. And it didn't get bought, but here it is. So it gets to live anyway,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's happened before that some of this stuff comes out, like this, and it the response is strong, and companies are like, you know what, maybe we should go do that. And there has been projects that have been resurrected through all of this.
True, but I expect nothing like that to happen.
Fair enough.
Well, actually, to be honest, as I've looked through some of this old material, I don't know if I necessarily want to do them now. Some of
Right.
them are very much of their time and only an idea that I could have thought of then and possibly executed with any kind of enthusiasm back then.
Yeah.
So I hope that nobody comes knocking. Where is that thing? Or the newsletter will probably be the thing.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's really cool. And I like that you're telling these stories and you're going into kind of pitches that didn't go. It will help a lot of creators as they're thinking about how to refine. Is that part of kind of the goal here? Is that people who are coming into comics, it gives them a chance to kind of see how it's done?
Well, I suppose it might give it somebody who's new to the business more perspective on what it is to have a career, a sustained career over years and decades.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of ups and downs. It's a lot of blind alleys and misfires and, try as you might and not quite hit the mark. And then also to have unexpected successes, and things that in the moment might not have seem to have hit, but given time, they find their audience. So history has been a lot kinder to my Uncanny X-Men run than I ever would have imagined back when I was doing it. Because it was rough back when I was in the thick of it. But, time heals all wounds, I guess. And I've heard people say nice things about it. And,
Yeah.
it's great.
A lot of people. We talked briefly about that. I remember before, but at the time, why was it so tough at the time for that run?
Well, a lot of reasons. For my run on Uncanny X-Men, people, I think some of the kindness that people show to it now is that they realize that I was coming out in tandem with Grant Morrison's new X-Men, which was, as it should have been, as it deserves, a creative juggernaut that is a classic to this day. So it was going to be hard for anybody to match up to that. And I never expected to. So it wasn't like I was disappointed because people didn't like me or like Uncanny as much as they like new X-Men. I like new X-Men more than I like Uncanny. So I'm not going to blame anybody else for that. I think also it was early days of the internet in terms of being a place where people got their news and people interacted with creators. And at first, for some people, and I count myself among them, sometimes it was a bumpy ride. And when you have a very passionate fan base, like the X-Men fan base was, especially at that time,
yeah,
colliding with rather headstrong creators, which I was and Grant was at that time, it was a polarizing moment, I think.
Yeah.
It was, I think, too, it was also the first real line in the sand with the X-Men from the past and the future. Because everything up until that point, even when it wasn't Chris Claremont, had been in that Claremont mode and had been always pushed editorially to be Claremont-like, or just X-Men had a voice. And here we were saying, we're going to very deliberately try a new voice.
Yeah.
That was going to be rough for a lot of fans. I get that totally.
Fortunately, that was the worst it got in terms of kind of internet feedback, and people really calmed down after that.
Well, yeah, right. Well, I will say this. We certainly, in our X-Men relaunch, paved the way for the 27 relaunches that have happened since then.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Now it's you're very welcome. We're those pioneers with the arrows in our backs, But it was a new thing at the time to take a venerable franchise and recast it and reskin it top to bottom, which is pretty much what we did.
The last time, you're absolutely right. There've been different phases of storylines, but you really have to go back to Giant Size X-Men for that level of shift in the book. And yeah, you're talking about 30 years there, right? If I'm doing the math right. And it was a major change. And also it's easy for people listening to this right now. We have seen the 27 relaunches, and I think that's being generous. It feels like it's been more than that. But it was, I mean, Marvel really didn't do that a lot at that time. That was, and certainly not to a book like the X-Men, which have been that sales juggernaut for a good 20 years, at least 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I don't think it had been done at all but at that point. I mean, even the quote unquote new Marvel launches that had happened previous to that in the year previous, where, JMS coming on Amazing Spider-Man, that was, basically just him picking it up and running with the ball. It wasn't a recasting of the whole thing, and it wasn't Spider-Man in a new outfit. And, it was kind of, and the Ultimate line, which had preceded us, was a whole new continuity. So that was a little bit more an easier pill for people to swallow. But ours was the first time. I mean, and it doesn't just stop with Uncanny and New X-Men. There was Milligan and Allred's X-Force, which is a huge head turner for a lot of people. So it was the whole line got upended, and I can imagine for X-Men readers, you were there.
Oh yeah,
it was quite a change, and
it was. It's the thing you said. It's even if you think about Age of Apocalypse and you think about those storylines where they paused things or, changed the books around, the voice was still the same. The voice was Claremont's voice, even when Claremont wasn't on it. It still had that same general thread. And then it was a very radical departure. Now, we've had at least a dozen radical departures since then. But
well, here's something that's not going to be in the newsletter in this series, but I'll tell you about it. A couple of years before I took over Uncanny X-Men, I was brought on as the scripter of Uncanny and what they called adjectiveless X-Men at the time, when Alan Davis was plotting and drawing on one of the series, and they brought me on to script it. I lasted a couple of issues, but my first script I turned in, I said, I was just the dialogue guy. I was just the words on the page guy. I was not the plotter. I didn't come up with the story. I just was putting words in characters' mouths. And I said to the editors at the time, look, I'm gonna break ranks here, and I'm not gonna have tons of captions. I'm not gonna have tons of inner monologue, thought balloons. I'm gonna play it more cinematically. This was 1999.
Okay. Yeah.
And they wouldn't let me do it. They in fact, I recall the word got back that my suggestion was laughed at in the offices. And then cut to 2 years later, we're all writing like that.
Yeah.
So for that idea, I was a couple of years too early. But again, all things come around, and 2 years later, it's exactly what we did on those X-Men.
Yeah. Now here we are. With the different books you've done, or actually, trying to think about ask this in the best way. As you've looked, you kind of already answered. As you looked at some of those pitches that got rejected, or some of the things that you may have pitched and wound up doing, or they got changed quite a bit, between your initial idea and then actually going to print. Is there any one of them that you'd really love to go back and take a crack at? Not maybe the one that was rejected, but something that it took on its own life, but maybe not the life you originally intended.
So that's a good question, Dan. I think the only one I would probably say I probably had another year or two of Wildcats in me, because that I felt like that book was really going somewhere that at the time superhero comics had not gone.
Yeah.
And I would have liked to explore that a little more. I got to say, I mean, not that I would change history or anything, but re-examining or re-looking at these Uncanny X-Men issues that I wrote, I started to remember some of the ideas that I did have that I didn't get to explore fully. And I talk about some of them in the newsletters, but even though the timing was right to leave when I did, I think looking back, I feel like, I'm looking back with hindsight now. Sure. At the time, I was pretty burnt out, so I don't know. But with having gotten not just a second win, but about 50 or 60 wins since then. I see things that I'd set up that I could have played out more and gone further with, and maybe really had some more fun on that book. But what are you going to do?
I know that hindsight is 2020, but I mean when you go back and revisit stuff, I think invariably you think about where it could have been and gone and made some different directions. I'm curious about something else, actually, kind of shifting gears, but curious to get on your newsletter. Rambi posted something a bit ago about basically continuity, and the perspective was, canon and continuity. Ultimately, it's meant to be broken. You've got decades and decades and decades with these characters, and there's no way to maintain it over time. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I'm trying to get the spirit of kind of what he was saying, but basically he was saying, like, look, it contradicts itself constantly. It's just an impossible thing to hold to. As you look at kind of some of the stuff you've done and where the comics have gone and everything else, which this seems to be a bit of a polarizing topic for writers. What's your take on continuity? Is it handcuffs, or is it freeing, or is it a platform, or where do you kind of sit with it?
Well, it's interesting because I personally love continuity until it gets in the way of a good story.
Sure.
So it's always, as a writer, it's always been a case by case basis for me. I love when things connect and have a flow that seems natural and seems like it all is a giant puzzle that all fits together. But we both know that's rare.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you said, so much time, we're going on years and years and years where characters can't age, and yet all these stories have happened to them and all this stuff has happened to them. And so it's an odd dilemma to have. I've gone all kinds of ways through my work. Sometimes I've bent over backwards to make sure the continuity fits. And sometimes I've completely ignored what's happened and just done whatever I want to do. Stacy X is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
I did we created her in Uncanny X-Men, and then I left that book, and she was left to the devices of whoever came after me and other creators. And from what I understand, a lot of weird shit was done to her.
Yeah. Yes.
Depowered and recast as a different identity, all kinds of weird things. However, when I came back around to doing the Vengeance miniseries, and I think it was 2011, and I wanted to bring Stacy X in for a cameo, I just ignored everything that had happened and just brought her back as though nothing had changed. And nobody said anything, not editors, not readers. So again, it's a crapshoot on what people care about, what writers care about, what creators care about, what readers care about. So I kind of go with my gut and let the chips fall where they may. Because again, you can't let continuity get in the way of a good story. And if continuity is a real barrier to that story, then maybe it's the wrong story.
Yeah.
So I mean, it goes all kinds of ways with that.
It's a tough topic, because I do think there's different ways to look at it. I like the way you laid it out there. I mean, as a reader, I think there's expectations that get set on continuity. I'm guilty of myself of, clearly there's 500 people who are sitting in an archive making sure that everything ties together perfectly. So you can read it all in one. And that's not true. At the same time, I'm also sympathetic to the idea of writers are coming in to tell a story, and if they want to tell a very specific story, I mean, if you want to tell a story where Peter Parker Spider-Man is a tech bro, and it fits nothing about the character, then arguably, why are you writing Spider-Man at that point? You're fitting the wrong story to the wrong character. So
that's right.
There's a balance there.
That's exactly right. If you've got to twist and contort a character beyond what that character is, you're telling the wrong story for the wrong character. It's simple. Doesn't devalue the story or the intent of the story, but just rethink the character you want to tell them with.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
On the topic of continuity as well, and again, I think it probably plays into some of the stuff you write about. You've worked for DC and Marvel. One of the questions I always mean to ask people who work for both companies, does one company do that better than the other from a continuity standpoint or just a kind of orchestration standpoint? And don't want to get you in trouble with anybody, but and I think there's probably different eras, different people, but is there a different flavor between the two?
I think it really comes down to the character and the editor and the story that you're telling. I mean, again, sometimes there's real care taken to keeping things consistent, and sometimes no one cares, and not for any reason, not for any nefarious reason. Just there are more important things to think about that day than whether or not you're being consistent with the last time this character appeared or whatever. And it comes down to attention span and human error and how conscientious somebody is on a certain day. I mean, it's not one company is different or better than the other. It's all the same everywhere.
Yeah. Well, for a long time, I think DC had this reputation too of they did Crisis and they did these kind of retcons of their universe or whatever, reboots of their universe, and it made it a mess. And I remember there was a lot of very high and mighty Marvel fans who were like, "We've never had to do that. Our universe is always consistent." And then that started to shake apart pretty heavily at some point. Although it still cracks me up a bit. There are Marvel fans you'll run into in a store, which will go, hey, this Secret Wars thing that Hickman did, it's still the same continuity. There's Marvel's never truly rebooted ever, but I don't think there's any high moral ground between either company at this point. Is there?
No, absolutely not. And believe me, if Marvel was on their high horse about, hey, we never had to reboot or relaunch the universe, whatever, if sales got low enough,
sure,
that'd be the first thing they do. I mean, it's a mercenary business, and if whatever works, whatever sells, morality kind of, or at least creative morality, goes out the window if you're trying to move units.
Sure.
So if that's where they get to, because I think from DC's point of view, people forget, maybe they don't forget, but it's been a while, when in the early 80s, aside from a couple of books, Marvel was slaughtering DC sales. Yeah. It's just pounding them month after month after month. And this was a big swing on DC's part. And it certainly worked.
Yeah.
But I don't think they would have thought to do that if they weren't getting their asses kicked for the past, 10, 15 years,
Well, the New 52 was similar. I mean, it was, again, a time where sales were struggling and, they went there to try and energize the line.
Yeah, they went there, Aaron.
Yeah. Fair enough. So you have this newsletter, you launch it, and how have you are you worried at all about the pace of kind of getting articles up and kind of feeding that beast?
No, I'm well ahead. I've got plenty of material now between the stuff that I've been writing specifically for it in the past couple of months and the archive material that I have backloaded for, the last 25 years.
Nice.
And beyond, like I said, it's some of the stuff that I'll be showing on this newsletter, as embarrassing as it is, some of my first comics that I ever tried to do when I was in the single digits as a human being. I'm going to throw those up there too occasionally and let people see really the humble beginnings of a modern comic book creator. And humble as I'm being generous. When I say humble beginnings, I mean, these things are amazing to look at. And part of me can't believe that I'm going to share them with whoever's interested in this newsletter. But in a time where I need the content, it's all up for grabs as far as I'm concerned.
Mind that content. I've got to think that's going to be pretty fascinating because you I mean, people always say, you can see the evolution of a career and how you've grown and everything else, but you're laying out that growth for everyone.
Well, I'll reveal this tidbit because this is probably not happening for a couple of months, but it's probably before the end of the year. These newsletters will hit what I'm about to talk about. So part of what I'm going to do is just because they're still around, and I love when I find them, but there's not the kind of comic book think pieces that there used to be. People aren't reading much anymore as it is. But I've started to write a few, and mostly examining old comics, some of the key issues that I grew up reading and loving. So they're decidedly and explicitly not reviews. I want to be clear about that because it's not about reviewing these comics. It's just about talking about them, exploring them, and maybe doing a deep dive on some of the stuff that I loved about them. So to that end, one of the first ones I'm going to be talking about is Avengers number 194.
Okay.
It's a famous issue written by David Michelinie, drawn by George Perez when he came back for the first time to the title. Got the classic cover with the Vision not fighting, but like doing like a training exercise and destroying all the training machinery, kind of like the Avengers Danger Room. And so I talk about that comic and its virtues, of which there are many. It's a great issue of Avengers. But what I had done when I was a kid is before 195 came out, I tried to write and draw my own version of Avengers 195. And I think I got about 11 pages in before the actual issue came out a month later. I was not most deadline conscientious guy when I was a young lad.
Perfect for today's comic industry.
That's right. I fit right in now. But I found that comic, that half a comic that I did.
Oh, that's awesome.
So 1 week will be my discussion of Avengers 194. The next newsletter will be my version of 195 for all the world to see.
And it blows the Perez title out of the water, right?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, it's amazing. I can't believe I didn't just send it to Marvel, have them publish
it. You'd be the next Jim Shooter right there. I'm excited.
Well, clearly, I didn't. It's funny because I have to imagine. I mean, I know that every one of us that does this for a living probably started out doing exactly what I did in some form or another. And I just don't know how many of us are dumb enough to show people, but I think I'm going to be one of them.
I've got stuff sitting around. I never made it, or I never actually got out there, but I should post some of that crap up. So,
I mean, you get old enough, you're not embarrassed quite as much as you would have been, 20 years ago. It's an age makes everything go down a little smoother.
That's true. Well, I'm definitely old enough, so I can get that kind of stuff out. So you got a lot of content built up. We got a big surprise coming in a few weeks. Newsletter available right now. You can go check it out. Any kind of recommendations? Anything that obviously you have your own book out at the moment, a couple books out at the moment. I'm saying this, so I try to think about what's going to be out when this video goes. You're getting the scheduling math in real time as my head starts to work. What is there anything that you're reading out there? Is there time between writing your newsletters, writing your own books? Is there anything that you're following at the moment?
The thing that probably will be the last issue should be out at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I really loved it, and I loved going back to it. Was Peter Bagg did Hate Revisited?
Yeah,
4 issues of the return to his Hate strip, which I loved when it was coming out. I mean, I've loved it ever since it started. And he hasn't lost a step. It's great. It's been my favorite comic the last 4 months. It made me go back and read the original 15-issue black and white run, and that's still great. So it's a little out of step with what I do for a living, but I think that's why I like it so much, is it's way different than anything I do. But I recommend it highly.
I've got to I wrote that down here. I'm going to review that. I'm going to click that and put that on there because more people should know that exists, I think.
It's a perfect encapsulation of a time and a place. And Peter Bagge is probably one of our best cartoonists of the last 30 years easily.
Yeah.
So, whereas sometimes it's a bit, as hopefully this newsletter won't demonstrate, sometimes it's a bit sad to revisit your old work or try to recapture the magic. He did a great job, and I love it.
Well, speaking of kind of looking back and revisiting and how things age, without revealing anything, so you'll get to it in the newsletter. As you went back and looked at some of these books and these characters, was there anything that struck you of like, wow, I'm that would not play well today at all?
Huh. You mean in terms of political correctness or
Anything, just social change, political correctness, anything that just like it was this is a story, a plot, something, a concept, and it would have worked then, and if it rolled out today, there'd be torches.
Well, I have to say, not really.
That's good.
I'll be honest. And funny enough, take it back to my X-Men run.
Mm-hmm.
The whole Stacey X thing at the time, again, was very polarizing. She was a very polarizing character because she started out as a prostitute, a sex worker. And I didn't write down to her or write her as anything of a lesser character. In fact, she held her head high, and what I've seen in the last, 20 years or so, when people have brought her up, especially recently, that they look at her as a very sex positive character.
Yep.
Which is great. I mean, it was my intention to portray her with as much dignity as possible. She was never meant to be a joke character or something that was meant to be looked down on at all. So again, as time has gone on, that type of character has become more acceptable in the mainstream. And so that's pretty gratifying.
Yeah, you were a futurist. You didn't know it.
That's right. Well, I did think back in the day that was part of our job. I mean,
yeah,
the whole X-Men relaunch was about trying to take that franchise into the future to some degree. And I guess I wasn't completely conscious of in what ways I was doing that.
Well, again, we've talked to you before, and I know we've talked about it a little bit before. Well, I'll take kind of an updated version of this question because that's going on. So speaking of characters that have evolved, obviously you created America Chavez as part of Vengeance. And that was the first appearance, right, of the character?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Nick Dragotta, who's now got this Batman title with Scott Snyder.
Yeah.
And now the character obviously got a solo title, lots of drama around the character, seems to have settled back down now. I mean, Marvel kind of pulled the character back. But is slowly starting to ease her back in. She's been in the MCU. Is there a case where, the character, I guess what I'm asking is, you've worked with these publishers. Is a case where the run or the character, the drama around it gets so toxic or so, it's just not landing has a publisher ever said, we got to take this whole thing off the shelf for a while and just let it cool down? Is that a common thing?
I've heard that before. I mean, that back in the day, I remember hearing the term that a character or a series that it was just recently canceled or taken off the boards was radioactive.
Radioactive.
We didn't want to have anything to do with it because it had bad mojo.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, that happens to most characters that go the distance. And sometimes they're hot and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And I think the mistake that is made, I think, with some new characters, and I would maybe put America Chavez in that category, is that, what people don't understand about, and you can look at the history of comics and see this right away. If a new character was launched and they had their own series, you could bet it was a guest spot in the first 3 or 4 issues from Spider-Man. And then later on, it was a guest spot in the first 3 or 4 issues of Wolverine or the Punisher. And the idea was legitimizing new characters by putting them up against or next to well-known and well-loved characters.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that is not a formula that has been remembered or stuck, because I think in the case of a character like America Chavez, had she been, and my intention from the very beginning was to have that character fight Doctor Doom, fight stand alongside the classic Marvel heroes and be one of them, not be shut off into her own fucking dimension or wherever they did, and be separated from the Marvel universe. She was meant to be integrated in the Marvel universe. So that's the whole point of characters that reflect different cultures and different ethnicities or whatever, is to integrate them into what might have been seen as a very whitewashed universe of characters.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any good if they're then compartmentalized off to their own corner of the Marvel universe. Don't put them in the mix with the guys that have been there. That's how you create legitimate new characters.
Well, I think it's funny. I agree with you. They don't do it as much, and I'm glad. Thank you for bringing us back. I've long forgot it because I'm old, apparently. So with the Dutch and kind of that progression of what you're doing in Image, it had that short story in an anthology, basically limited series to ongoing, and that is a very proven path. It still works, is the funny part. The success of Miss Marvel as a character initially, I don't, this has been memory hold, but when the character came out, it spun out of this Inhuman, the Avengers event that Hickman had run. It was kind of a piece of that. That's where she became Inhuman. And in the first several issues, they had a Wolverine guest star and they had a Spider-Man guest star. It was exactly that, giving that new character the rub of the popular character.
Yep.
And then they kind of eased it in. It skipped the limited series part, but it did ease in the way you described. And they were very conscientious at the beginning to, give her supporting cast, but make it very clear she was part of the Marvel universe and it was part of the bigger story, and they were leveraging that. And it did work.
Yeah.
And it seems like they got some success, and immediately then once it started getting going, then they almost doubled down on avoiding that formula, which worked for them.
Well, I think that what happens is comic book creators, and this goes to editorial probably as well, depending on your age and your knowledge of the business. And I've been guilty of this myself. Sometimes you can get very self-conscious about things, certain things, and then you'll look at something like as something as formulaic on the surface as a third issue guest appearance by Spider-Man or Wolverine or whoever, as simply crass marketing, and you reject that on that basis. But those, like you say, those things work, and they have worked in the past. And it's up to us, if we're swimming in those waters, those mainstream big publisher waters. Those formulas, you need to make them work for you.
Yeah,
not rail against them because you're an artiste or whatever. This is a commercial business. I mean, you can break the rules with your creator-owned stuff all day long, and there's no fallout except your own, whatever. But when it comes to setting things up to, again, build things to last, some of these techniques, whether or not they're crass or marketing techniques or whatever you want to call them, they work. And it's up to us as creators to make sure that they are still good stories and still well told, still feel organic to the characters you're dealing with. And it doesn't read as a marketing ploy. It doesn't read as crass commercialism. It reads as a story.
Yeah.
But, there is part of the optics of, it's crass and it's commercial, but you're trying to sell here. You're trying to sell things. You're trying to, it's a commercial, like I said, it's a commercial endeavor.
It is. It is.
So don't back away from those things. Embrace them and do them better than anyone has done them before.
No, I can't agree more. And to further, when you're in this B2B to C business where you have the retailer in the middle, they've got to figure out what you're doing to then take it, all the way to the customer. And so a lot of these tried and true marketing techniques, the retailers understand very well. Like, this is a guest issue with Spider-Man. I've got people who put on their pull box every issue Spider-Man is in, including the guest appearances. So that's going to be an extra purchase, which is going to get more exposure. They know how to market that quite well. So when you avoid these things because you feel they're, played out or, they're beneath you, you're hurting that person in the middle who who's not in your head, does not understand these things you're doing, and just wants a simple way to have a commercial business themselves to stay alive. So can't agree more.
Yeah. And by the way, to bring it back to the Substack, I'm sure that there's retailers that listen to your
For sure.
one or I really hope that they check out the newsletter as well, because I'm definitely talking about things that are business related and business conscious. And, it's a weird business structure that we have in comics where, our first line of customers are the retailers.
Right.
And I'm as interested in speaking to them as I am in speaking to anyone who would read any comic that I've written. So hopefully any retailers out there will check out the Substack as well and hopefully get something out of it.
We'll go over to it. The link you've seen a lot. It's launched. It's live now. If you're, and then really, I'm calling on you. You're wasting your time with memes all day on Twitter. So give us one of these. Point people to this Substack here. Sounds like a lot of good behind the scenes stuff, business stuff, retailers. We'll get the word out. Joe, I want to take too much time, because I think if you're willing, in a couple weeks, love to have you back, talk about this big project you've got. And
absolutely, we're going to do that, so don't worry about it.
All right,
definitely,
we got to do that. All right, go check out the Substack, Joe. Thank you so much for your time here today. I can't wait to read it.
Thanks, man.